Okay, we are
All right.
live.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dart.
And I'm Lisa.
We're so glad you joined us tonight, and or if you're listening to this on a replay, so glad for you to join in. But we'll tell you a little bit about who we are. Is that we believe that life is full, or a complete life is full of relationships, your health, and your wealth. And so
Absolutely. I thought you were going to say we were just two crazy kids trying to have fun on a farm.
Well,
Something like that.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
But tonight we have a special guest.
We're going to tell them about the financial planning.
Oh, we were going to tell them about the financial.
Yes.
Oh, we actually do financial planning. But y'all, we really love to make your financial planning fun because we feel like it's important to make memories now, but plan for your future so you're less stressed and so you can have fun in your future.
Right. So it's about making the process easy, fun,
yes.
enjoyable, and taking the fear out of it. And so that's what we're about. So,
well, I think the fun is for the client, and it's easy.
Absolutely.
We make it easy on them.
Right.
And then we get stressed out trying to make it all perfect and make it all come together.
But we're just the guide, you know.
That's exactly right. We're the guide, and they're the hero.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Well, speaking of heroes.
Oh, absolutely.
We have a hero joining us tonight.
This amazing man. His name is John Villanueva. He's former national security professional, a former military intelligence professional. He has worked and served in the Middle East for over a decade. And we wanted to have this conversation. There's a lot of stuff going on about Israel and a lot of questions. And so John is going to give us some background and then bring us up to date. And so without further ado, my very good friend, John Villanueva.
All right. Yay. Hi, John.
And let me unmute you.
Thank you for having me on, Lisa and Donald. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think tonight is a really good topic. It's high in the headlines. And I think a lot of times, you know, we as Christians, you know, we try to read and study and learn, but you know, I think it's just better to come and hear this information from you. Like, you spent a decade there. I think you have some insightful information, and maybe just catch us up, you know, kind of go back to the beginning of maybe 1947.
Okay. So if you think about it, it's really, when you're talking about Israel and Palestine, it's really important to have the context in play. Because when you have the context in play, it helps you to understand the people better and their situation. So Israel's basically founded in 1948. In 1947, the UN declares it an independent state. Its population is predominantly Jews that have survived the Holocaust and have migrated from Europe. There are now, prior to the creation of the State of Israel, there were Jews throughout the Middle East. It's important to realize that. They were in Iraq, Iran, they were in neighboring countries, and it had long and historic presence in the Middle East. Now, after World War II, after the Holocaust, part of the Zionist movement is that they want to have an independent home, a place that they can call their own. And so the state is created. Now, when that happens, from the Israeli standpoint, or the European Jewish mindset, they're looking for a home, right? They're looking for a homeland that won't throw them out, cast them aside, or make them scapegoats. So you understand, anyone can understand that pursuit. From the Palestinian side, there was a country called Palestine, and Palestine existed under a British mandate. And there were Arab Palestinians living in this region with historic ties to the land. So when you say that you're going to divide the land up and you're going to create a new state, and it's going to be an Israeli state or a Jewish state made up mostly of European immigrants, to those Palestinians, right, it looks like a land grab, right? And so they ally themselves. And as soon as Israel's declared a state, they launch a war, right? And that war leads to years of turmoil that exists up and until this day. Part of the problem, and you can't go back and recreate history, is that it dislocated tens of thousands of people. And by dislocating people, okay, those people, if I came into your home and I said, Donald and Lisa, I'm staking claim to your home. You're going to have to move out. You wouldn't be a happy camper.
No.
Nor with your children. Many of those Palestinians, especially after the Arab-Israeli war, end up in refugee camps around the world. So this creates generational resentment.
Right.
Now, Israel suffers over the course of time. They fight 5 more wars. Okay. They have 2 intifadas. Dialogue starts for a peace accord under Carter, in which, after the last war, Carter intervenes, tries to bring about a peace. He brings Egypt, that famous picture, Begin and Sadat shaking hands. And at that time, basically, the United States bribes these 2 countries through foreign aid into a peace.
Right.
Now, the problems persist over time because none of the wounds inflicted on either side are really ever healed, right?
Mm.
The Israelis, all right, the Jews who come from Europe, who've just survived the Holocaust, are now in a fight for their life, right? To hold on to this land that they feel is theirs historically. The Palestinians are in a fight for their life, for land that is historic to them. They think they have just more of a claim to, and they're being cast aside. And in wars, violence occurs, and violence is never pretty, regardless of who the victim or who the perpetrator is. Right? Violence is just it's horrifying.
Right.
So let's come up to present day, right? You have to separate 3 things if you really want to understand Israel: separate its politics, separate religion, okay, and then set yourself aside for a second and try to be objective and understand with some empathy the plight of both peoples. And then if you care about Israel, if you care about the Jews, if you care about Palestinians, you would hope, all of us would want, that they would have a stable nation in which their children would not have to confront the violence and potential for violence that exists today.
Yes.
Right.
So what happens is, and here's the politics, Benjamin Netanyahu is embroiled in a corruption scandal, and he's struggling to hold on to power as prime minister. That's the politics side of it. The other part of that is that there is a movement afoot in East Jerusalem. West Jerusalem is considered Jewish. East Jerusalem is occupied predominantly by Palestinians. And there's a move afoot to basically evict, not because they've not paid their rent, but because people are claiming their rights to their land, evict these Palestinians from these homes. This happens in Ramadan, which is a holy day on the high Muslim calendar. And you have these fundamentalist Israelis walking through their communities, attempting to evict or announcing that there will be evictions on this land. This case had been in the courts. And as you would imagine, this incites violence.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The Temple Mount, the western wall of the Temple Mount, is on the side of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the 3rd holiest site in Islam. Right? Palestinians then start to protest there. And you have the police that guard the Temple Mount, and the IDF that actually pursue. I'm not really sure about the reasons why. They may have thought that there was some, threat inside, but they actually pursue people into the mosque, right? Which creates a firestorm. Hamas then threatens to retaliate, right? I think it was within 4 hours, rockets fly into Israel, and Israel retaliates with airstrikes. And this is basically, a brief description of what gets us here.
It's absolutely horrifying.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, just to kind of take a breath, is that we here in Middle Tennessee or abroad or just in the U.S. in general, we can't imagine what is going on. I mean, whenever you text a friend of yours and said, hey, are you okay? And she says, well, I'm okay, but the building beside me is not. Mm-hmm. That is a world that we can't even imagine.
No.
So
no. No.
I mean,
But
that's
Don,
right.
you're passionate about this. Could you just give us tell us what is your why are you so passionate about this subject? Could you just tell us your
I
story
actually got involved in the Middle East in 1990, right? Because I was an advisor in the special operations community on Middle East affairs.
mhm.
So from 1990 to 1995, I was in the region extensively, traveling through different countries. Israel was one of the first countries that I traveled to, Israel and Jordan, because during the first Persian Gulf War, I was a liaison that went there to, have discussions about why they should stay out of the war and not retaliate to what was Scud missiles that were inbound to their country, attempting to provoke a regional war and fracture the alliance, which the Israelis did. They did restrain themselves at that time. But it was at that time that I formed real relationships with members of the defense establishment in Israel, and we formed long-lasting friendships. And at the same time, before having gone to Israel, I spent a lot of time in Jordan before the first Persian Gulf War,
Oh,
and actually met and had conversations with members of the PLO, which is the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and
Right.
sat in many a tea shop and discussed their grievances and what they felt were the historic wrongs.
mhm.
And what I discovered, as you discover in any situation like this,
Mhm.
is that if you're looking at the humanity of the individual, right, what you see are human beings.
Yes, that's exactly right, John. Yes.
That's on both sides. What you see are human
Yeah.
beings. And what you see is ordinary people caught up in a firestorm of controversy and political machinations, most of which were not brought into existence through their own hands.
Right.
Right. And they're in a reactive mindset, reacting to what they perceive to be fears, threats of violence, and threats to the future of their country and their families. And so if you take a step back, you can recognize the humanity in each of these groups of people,
Yeah.
and then try to empathize and understand why is it that they're approaching the world the way they are, right? And if you're honest about it, you can kind of understand both sides and understand where both sides are correct and both sides are wrong. Now,
Right.
let me be clear about something. I feel, and I think it's only fair to say this, because some people, they always want to know which side you land on, right? And when they do that, they do it in kind of like a really hard extremist kind of a line. You're either with us or against us.
Right.
The reality is that you can be pro-Israel and you can want the best for that country and its people and still have empathy for the Palestinian cause.
Yes.
Right. And respect the humanity of all parties.
Yes.
And that's where I come down.
Amen. Amen,
Right?
John.
I believe in the world of realpolitik, and what that means is that the Israelis are not going to surrender the land they're sitting on and give it back to the Palestinians that were there, right? Just like Americans are not going to pick up tomorrow and say to the Native Americans, you can have the land back, we're leaving, right? We're going back to Ireland, we're going back to England, right? This isn't going to happen.
Right.
So understanding that and saying that Israel is a country, it has a right to self-determination, and it has a right to claim a stake to its land and be defensive when in fact it has been attacked multiple times. Right? They've not been necessarily, in terms of a ground war, they've not been the aggressor. Right? So you say this country's there. At the same time, you have to recognize the Palestinian people that live in the West Bank and Gaza, and some people forget, many Palestinians live within Israel proper, and they are citizens. Those people have a right to self-determination too. They have a right to feel safe and secure, and as if they're worthy of having a future.
Yes.
So that's the situation that I take on it. Is the reality is, how do we deal with the reality on the ground now? And I think there are a couple of fallacies that may be unpopular. Some of your audience members may be surprised to hear, and some will disagree with. And reasonable people, reasonable and informed people can disagree on these types of things. This talk of a two-state solution, this is a fallacy. The Israelis have never taken that seriously. That's for American audience. That's for an American consumption, right? The Israelis have never had in mind to have two separate states, totally independent, sovereign in all ways, side by side. It's not in their interest, right? And so you say to yourself, why is it not in their interest?
Right.
One, they've had 5 wars over that piece of land.
Wow.
Okay, they've occupied certain territories so that they might gain a strategic advantage in order to repel an invasion in the future. And if you look at Israel, it's a very small country. All right, it's about the size of New Jersey. It's roughly, I think it's like 100. It's about 260 miles long and 71 miles wide at its widest end. It's a very small country. Yeah. And you can actually traverse the country. You can traverse its width within an hour and its length probably within 4 hours, right? And so there's not a lot of landmass there. And so they're holding on to strategic positions in anticipation of a future threat. And so if you have 2 real states, right, just ask yourself, if you're going to be an independent state, what should that state be afforded? Its own government.
Yes.
A claim to its land, a claim to what's under the land, water, right? What's on the land, crops, buildings, infrastructure, a claim to what's above the land, it's airspace, right? Different countries. Germany allows us to have an installation in Germany. Okay, so let's say you had 2 states and they were fully autonomous states with all the rights and privileges of states. Could the Palestinians invite Iran in to have an installation in Palestine?
Yeah.
Right? You couldn't stop that.
Right.
And so to say to Israel, go ahead and divide it 2 states and then go ahead and take on these risks of what could potentially happen in states that are potentially unstable and unfriendly. That's kind of unrealistic.
Right.
We wouldn't do that. Right. We wouldn't do that in the United States, nor would, that's not a fair expectation of them.
Right.
And if Benjamin Netanyahu and if the former president did one thing, was they kind of exposed the facade of that kind of thinking. Right? There's no real intent. There's never been any sincere, not even in Oslo, was there really a sincere effort to come up with a 2-state solution. Right? Put that 2 states aside. 2 peoples, 1 nation, living side by side. Now, that may seem impossible, but that's really the only viable solution. Those Palestinians aren't going anywhere.
Right.
They're not going to be cast to the rest of Arabia.
Right.
Absolutely. England, the United States isn't going to say, hey, to all 2.something million Palestinians in Gaza, come to Brooklyn. Right. That's not going to happen. Right. So how do you put in place a country that can respect the sovereignty of these 2 people, afford them certain rights, allow them to live safely side by side without threat or fear, and without impeding their ability to prosper?
Absolutely. That's the question everybody wants to know. And by the way, if you are watching, you can put in your chat, you can put your questions. And I'm sorry, McKenna's not on here tonight. She's off tonight. Yeah. So, but we can see your comments and hey to y'all. Yes, get on there, chime in, say hello, and you can send your questions. So yes. We just can't type back. But yes, John, this is the question. This is the answer we've all been waiting for.
Yeah. This is the challenge that these people face. And it's a very real challenge. And the solution is a generational solution, right? Because it will take generations for these 2 people to come to terms with one another and to trust each other enough that they can live side by side.
Yes.
Now, it's not really that far off, though. All right. I mean, I go to Israel all the time. I've been in the West Bank. I've been in Gaza. I've gone to dinner there with friends, with Jewish friends, right? And I've had Palestinian friends go to dinner with me in Israel. It's possible. We tend to only see one view of this, but in Israel, the Jews themselves have different points of view on this. And it's important to realize that sometimes they have a greater diversity of views on this issue than even Americans do. It is truly possible, but it's not something that you can make happen within, a soundbite, right? And within a news cycle. It's a generational process.
Yes.
But I think it's something that ultimately they have to come to terms with.
Yes.
Right? That it's going to be one state, two people. And that they're really, if the minute they start to discuss that honestly, I believe that they'll make leadway. Right? Because I've talked to many Palestinians who understand that they are not being represented properly by Hamas.
Yeah.
They are not being represented properly by the PLA. Okay. And many who live in Israel who recognize that the quality of life and the promise for their families and their children is better in Israel than it is in the West Bank or Gaza. Right. And there are some thorny issues that have to be resolved. One of the sticking points here is what is called right of return. There are Palestinians in refugee camps, 2 or 3 refugee camps around the world. And do these people have the right to return to their historic home? When they return, will the return, how will they be received?
Right.
And not only by the Jews, but by fellow Palestinians. How will they be received?
Right.
Okay. How will they be integrated into society? All right. And then if this seems impossible, I offer you one example that will make you rethink it. And that is that after World War II, the Russians invaded East Germany and they built the Berlin Wall. Right. And these two people were separated. And the quality of life on the East was far, far different from the quality of life on the West.
Right.
And when that wall fell, okay, they didn't run to each other with just hugs and kisses.
Right.
They were suspicious.
Right. Exactly.
West Germans who had done exceptionally well, who lived in what you would consider a very middle-class existence in a very organized and well-run country, looked at their East German relatives, right, and said, "Ooh, I'm not sure." Right. On the other side of the track.
What have y'all been doing on that side of the wall, right? Exactly. Yeah. But I do read about there are a lot of Jews and Palestinians who are their neighbors right now. They're friends. They get along. They do things together, and this is really hard for them. Yes, and there are a lot of and believe it or not, this is a real issue of contention, which is intermarriage. Yes.
Right. And to Israelis, their biggest fear into Jews is that they will lose their culture, their religion, their bloodline. Yeah. Right? Right. And one of the things that happens when you get attractive young men and attractive young women in an environment where they can look at one another and say, wow, she's actually kind of pretty. Oh, she's Palestinian. It doesn't detract from the point that she's an attractive young woman or that he's an attractive man, right? Or vice versa. Right? People have relationships and form friendships, and sometimes they get romantically engaged and get married. And I happen to know a couple like that.
Right. Oh, wow. Right? I've worked with some like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it. It wasn't easy on them or their family members. But this is what happens once you remove the layers, the veil that keep us from seeing one another as people. Religion is a veil. Yeah. If you're looking through it, you look at it through that prism. Nationality, a veil. A prism. race, and all of these things, right? We see people before we hear them sometimes based on,
Right.
the complexion of their skin, religious, history, the whole nine, your education.
Mm-hmm.
But once you strip that away, now you're in a room with another human being.
Right.
Right.
You start to see that person as a person. You think of them very differently.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But that takes time. It takes a generation or two. And both sides are actually afraid of that.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And we see it here in this country, in America.
I that was my hesitation. I started to say that, and I was like, no, I'm not gonna go there. But
in this country. Yeah. Part of the grievance expressed that led to the events of January 6th was a sense that people, the country was becoming too integrated, right? It was becoming too colorful. That there was far too much tolerance. People were being allowed to live lives. People, not individuals, people were being granted the right to self-determination.
Yes.
And then there's another group of people that say, well, I don't really kind of like the idea. I'm not comfortable with you having a right to self-determination. Right?
Yeah.
This is, tribalism is not only is it historic, but it's pervasive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And individual sovereignty, perhaps the one beautiful thing about our Constitution is that in its design and intent, and the way it's been argued from the day it was written with 9 amendments to its current 27, 29 amendments, I believe we're up to, right? The way it was designed is to try to extend an opportunity to individuals to be equal members of society, to have a right to self-determination, right? If you look at the 4 sections of the First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech, right? In many countries, people meet brutal ends as a result of just voicing opposition.
Yeah.
Right. That's why we've come up with a word for it, dissidents.
Yes.
Right. The Russians poisoning their dissidents abroad. Right. Freedom of religion. There's a reason for that. Yeah. Those that migrated to the United States, had survived the Inquisition. Right. They had survived and witnessed the Inquisition.
Right.
There was religious oppression abroad.
Yes.
And when they came here, they didn't want to live under a system of religious oppression that favored one religion or another, or they didn't want to have a state-sanctioned religion. Right. Freedom of assembly. The fact that you and I can get together and petition government, express grievances. Well, in other countries, they didn't have a right to do that. Right? Mm-hmm. And so that freedom of assembly was not there. Our Constitution in this country is one in which we try to afford people. There's a difference between equal access to opportunity, right? The right to be sovereign as an individual, okay, and everything else. And in this country, the individual, those rights of sovereignty, personal sovereignty, are everything. Yeah. And other countries that are evolving are starting to recognize this too. That's what America is, one of the few countries in the world that doesn't build walls to keep people in.
Right.
Right. We try to build, all the discussions of building walls are to keep people out.
Right.
But there are nation states throughout the world that build walls to keep people in, right? And where conformity is the highest value, right? Obedience is what's expected,
right?
Okay? In this country, there is respect for individual sovereignty, for the expression of one's will, and that's a beautiful thing. When you think,
yes, pray it stays that way.
Yes. Absolutely. Hey, John, we have a question from Michelle. She says, where do we go based on the right to return as outlined by the UN?
So if you think of the United Nations, right, the United Nations is putting forth, they're trying to be the United Nations acts with a degree of partisanship, so to speak, or right? But they're also trying to be honest brokers and say, hey, listen, this is what we see happening on the ground, right? And they try to bring about some consensus. I would say that that's the starting point for the discussion, right? That's where the discussion begins. Here's what's been proposed. Now let's talk about what's reasonable, right?
Yes.
What's actionable,
Right.
Yes.
okay? What can we live with as people?
Yes.
One of the things in the UN Charter is that they're buying into the lie, a two-state solution. And I know there are going to be lots of people out there who say, no. I heard Netanyahu himself say a two-state solution. I heard Biden say it. It's a facade. It's never going to happen.
Right.
It's been talked about since the beginning. It has not happened, nor will it ever happen. Okay?
Yeah.
So the minute you eliminate that lie and you say we're going to have one state, two people, because in the UN agreement is these people have a right to return to a country that's established once we have two independent states. Right? Which means they're never returning.
Right.
Okay? But once we take the lie off the table, we have one state, two peoples. How do we open our doors and afford these individuals the right of return? Or how do we create opportunities so that these people can migrate elsewhere other than the refugee camp? The refugee camps do not serve anyone well.
No.
Right.
Okay?
No.
Because that's where you breed hostility. That's where you breed hatred. That's where you breed resentment. Okay?
Right.
That's where you recruit people that are disenfranchised into organizations like Al-Qaeda and others. Right?
Right.
Anybody who thinks that these refugee centers are a good thing, they're naive. They've never been to one. Right? And in reality, they're a good thing in the sense that people receive shelter, they receive, food. They may have some education programs there. There's some assistance with migration. But if I kept a family basically imprisoned within a 4 square mile refugee camp for 3 generations.
Right. No.
Okay. That doesn't work. It wouldn't work for you. It wouldn't work for any of the people watching this.
Absolutely.
Why would we think it would work for someone else?
No. But nor does bombing innocent children.
Yeah. Just sending rockets. Yeah.
One of the things I have always said, I've told my Palestinian friends this. I said, you could take a lesson from the United States in the civil rights movement, right? Like, it's very difficult to defeat nonviolent protests.
Yes.
Right? India proved it. African Americans here in this country, even in countries like Chile under Pinochet, and he was a monster, right? I mean, we could have an entire show as to why Pinochet was a monster. Even in countries like that, peaceful protests work, right? The South Africa had violence. They didn't have a war, right? But it was the peaceful protest and advocacy within the country and outside of the country that led to the end of an apartheid state in South Africa.
Right.
Violence, not only does it build hostility and resentment, it reinforces fear.
Yes.
If I fear you, I can't see you as a person.
Right.
So for the Palestinians, for Hamas and others, Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is a very minor influence in Israel. Hamas is the major influence there, in the PLA. For these organizations, they're vested. There's money to be made on violence.
Okay, why does it always come back to money?
Yeah. The money. And here's the reality in a lot of ways. All of these terrorist groups have profit centers. There are people that donate money to support the cause. But a lot of those causes are also fueled through illicit activity, whether it's the trafficking of arms, whether it's the trafficking of drugs, whether it's the trafficking of women or children, or whatever it is, they're making money.
Right.
Okay? There's always a black market component to this.
Right.
And if you start to talk about peace, and peace starts to any way take root, it messes up the profit centers.
Right.
The same is true for Israel.
Right. Right.
Right.
Well, and the same is true for the United States.
Yes. Okay. And so, but the reality is, and we know this from experience, sustained peace brings about prosperity.
Yes.
Right? The United States is prosperous in large part because it has been relatively peaceful since World War II. We had minor skirmishes in Korea and Vietnam and other places. But in the last 20 years, what has devastated the economies of this country?
Yeah.
Endless wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria.
Right.
Trillions of dollars spent.
Yes.
Imagine spending those trillions on infrastructure where in Tennessee you just had a bridge collapse.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay? You can't, if you start to look at the money being spent on war and you think about how that money could have been used to greater effect on domestic policy, whether it's education, whether it's the elimination of poverty, whether it's revitalizing farming practices, whether it's building the driverless car, whether it's retraining people for the job of the future.
Yes.
That money is better spent there.
Yes.
War only profits a few people.
Yeah.
Right? The company that builds the, cruise missile, and we hit a mud hut with it at a cost of $700,000 to $1.4 million a missile. They're doing well.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay? They're doing well. The taxpayer that's funding that initiative is being robbed.
Yes. Agreed.
Okay? And I think that we have to, Eisenhower warned us, and I think we have to take that warning serious. And I'm a military guy. I spent 21 years in the Army. I come from a military family. My wife and I served. My wife's family has served since the Civil War. My family since World War I. So we're a very strong military family. But every dollar spent building a tank, fielding a missile, putting an aircraft carrier at sea is a dollar that's not spent in your community to uplift its residents.
Agreed.
And that's why there has to be a balance. Military spending is necessary.
Yes, it is.
Okay, but it must be a disciplined expenditure. And we can't go out looking for wars of choice rather than wars of necessity.
Yes.
Right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Well, as we're approaching our time, is there anything else about Israel? Because we was looking for ways to live in peace or sustain peace in Israel that's you want to bring before we wrap up here.
Leave the closing thoughts. Yeah.
As Americans,
yes,
we have to start to exercise greater discernment when it comes to the policies we support in Israel. And we have to stop buying into lies. There's never going to be a two-state solution.
Right.
It's one state, two people. How do we, if we're going to provide humanitarian assistance, okay, it shouldn't be for a bullet. It should be for, hey, let's make the Gaza a prosperous place.
Right.
Or let's make the West Bank a prosperous place that can sustain two people. Because if you're gainfully employed, right, if your children are in a good school and if they have a future, you're not going to be tolerating launching of rockets.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And so if we're going to be involved, let's be involved in a meaningful and humanitarian way.
Yes.
Right.
That promotes peace.
Yes.
Not rockets.
Yes.
Right.
Right? I mean, I think we have to take a more proactive position as Americans to be better informed and be good allies.
Yes.
Right? Good allies aren't thinking about how the defense industry profits. It's thinking about how people can have a prosperous future and peace in their state.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
Amen.
Absolutely.
And so we really need to be much better and stop allowing people to divide you. You're either pro this or pro that. These are foolish arguments to strip away your ability to discern between right and wrong, what's possible and what's impossible.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And we look around the world is full of lessons. And so you say, well, that's never been done before. That's not true. Most things have been done before. Right.
Right. Right.
You know, even like somebody told me the other day, well, the internet is something completely new. We never would have. A message is a Post-it note.
Right.
We did it for years with paper and pencil. Now we just do it digitally.
Right.
Right.
Right. You've reinvented a way to do something old.
Right.
Right. We send email. We used to send letters.
Yes.
Right.
Right. We had real friendships. Now some people are going to digital friendships, right, or synthetic ones. Right. But not everyone. Not what we lack sometimes is a lack of imagination, a lack of honesty, and a lack of will. But there's always a way.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd love to see Americans not only become more engaged, but more understanding. I don't know. The other day, there was this act of foolishness in which there were Israelis in New York, expressing support for Israel. And then you had these pro-Palestinian people that come out, and then they get into a brawl in Times Square. Now, you live in a country. I want you to think about this for a second. You're in one of the most prosperous nations in the world in which your rights are defined in a document called the Constitution, right? And it's a document that is the envy of the world. And you're in one of the wealthiest and most beautiful states in the world, New York City. And that's the best you can do?
Right.
Is get into a brawl?
Right.
That's the best you can do? I mean, shame on both of them.
Right.
Shame on both of them for that act of violence and foolishness.
Right.
If they're living together in Brooklyn, if they're living together in any of the 5 boroughs, there should be example as to how to live together abroad.
Exactly.
Right. And when I saw that, I really I just felt bad for both of them.
Right.
Because I bet you that if you sat down with them, none of them even understand the issues that are at play here. Right.
Great point.
Seek first to understand.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Seek first to understand. Let's try to understand this issue.
Yes.
Right.
And make sense of it, and then see if there's something reasonable that can be done.
Right.
Instead of automatically running to extremist corners and throwing rockets and this is foolishness.
Right.
Right.
And I always believe in getting your information from different resources. Don't just go to one source and think you just know everything. I just really encourage everyone become educated. So you're not just choosing a side thinking, oh, but they're doing this. But look at it as a total sum, as the whole.
Right.
Looking at it from both sides, both perspectives.
Yeah. And don't believe the politicians.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
But and it's like pray for the humans. I mean, pray for the humanity. It's like pray for the leadership, and there's a lot of power in that. And it's like it's pray for those who are enemies of each other, so that that peace comes from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take a change of heart. In a lot of this, because it is so generational, and it just because it has been that way doesn't mean it has to be that way tomorrow.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example of something that here's food for thought. If you turn on, I don't care if you turn on Fox, CNN, MSNBC, whoever you turn on, and you see this issue being discussed, what you see is someone saying, hey, Israel has a right to self-determination and self-defense. Those 2 sentences, and then they turn it off. That's a cop-out. Right? What they're really saying is, my constituency or organized political action committees fund my campaign. And it's dangerous for me to have this discussion because I can't secure their funding to maintain power in the future, to hold my political seat. Those are cowards. Okay.
Well, way to just call it out, John. But you know what that says to you, the American people, those of you who are watching on replay, your voice is powerful. Your voice needs to be heard.
Yeah,
it does. Get informed, get involved, make a difference.
Yes.
A meaningful difference.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And in this country, the beauty of it is you don't have to storm the Capitol to make a difference.
Right.
You just have to understand the issues and vote or organize.
Yes.
Right.
At the local and the state and the national level.
Yes.
Right. That's the beauty of this democracy. We don't have a shooting war every 4 years to change power.
Exactly.
We have an election.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So,
Amen.
Right.
Thank you, John, so much.
Yeah.
And you say some of the hard things that some people are not willing to say. So we appreciate you.
Yeah.
Are you how close are you to getting your podcast up and going?
That's a good question, Donald. So it is my fault, right? My web developer is a fantastic human being. He knows it. He's probably watching this. He's asked me to provide him some things to get this up and going by July 4th. And I have been slow on the move. I will get moving on that so they will be up and running by July 4th.
Well,
perfect. And what is your podcast going to be called so people can look for you?
So it's going to be John Villanueva's American Experience.
John Villanueva's American Experience. And David Dang says, stay tuned.
That's right. And David Dang is my web developer, my partner in almost every endeavor, and he is an amazing web developer, an amazing and talented guy who has been, he had me in the chokehold. We got to go out and get this, and I'm trying to accommodate him.
Yeah,
he's
now
a great friend.
The audience needs to understand that this man is doing a lot of things, and he stays up. I mean, because we can talk about 10 different topics as in depth as this. So he is not slouching around.
Right.
This guy works very, very hard.
Yes.
And so if anything, he needs to take a few things off his plate. But
thank you, Donald. My wife is going to hear. My wife heard you, and I'm sure she's going to tell me, "Listen to Donald."
That's right. That's right.
Hi, Francine.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for getting on tonight, and please share this. Put your comments in. Give us, if you like this and you want to hear more. It's like we love having John come back. We don't want to wear him out, but every 10 or 12 weeks, we need to have him on the show. But share this too, and there's, I think that a lot of our pastors and ministers and stuff in church, really need to understand the issues of what's going on, and not take it out of tradition. There's it's decades of false information that's been going on, and so it's time to get everything up to date. So,
a shameless plug, Donald, if you don't mind.
Sure.
That is, I visit Nashville to stay with you guys and with my good friend Todd and Carl and everyone down there. And me being a Christian, I'd be happy to speak at anyone's church on this topic anytime I come.
Oh, okay.
I mean, so let that be an invitation. If you want to have a discussion,
right?
Please send an invitation, and if I'm in town, I'll come. And there's a friend of mine down there, Donald knows well, Todd Bradley, who's a scholar on these topics. And hearing his point of view is very important, because Todd has an incredibly informed point of view on Israel.
Right.
So
that's great.
Yeah. So, all right. Great topic. Great show. So,
good being with you.
Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, John. It's an honor.
Okay. See you, Lisa. See you, Don.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, he went ahead. There we go.